Lord, that you would just give us peace in this place. So may your word be a light to our path and a lamp to our feet. Sorry, I didn't realize I wasn't switched on at first. Hope you can all hear me now. So as I was thinking about baptism, I was thinking how it's like a before and after moment, where we're before and then after, where we die with Christ and rise to new life. And I wonder if we can think of many before and after moments in our lives. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking about, so cooking-wise, I'm not really an expert. And sometimes it's a bit hit and miss with me. Sometimes it can go okay. And sometimes it's an absolute disaster. And so I thought I'd show you one of my cooking disasters. Are you ready? Brace yourselves. Hopefully it won't gross you out too much. So this was meant to be, any guesses? Meringue, good guess. Cookie. It's actually meant to be a chicken pie, believe it or not. So I might have overcooked the chicken. I might have undercooked the pastry. And then it turns out it's not a good idea to change your mind partway through on whether to have the pastry underneath or on top. But do you want to see attempt 2? So next slide, please. There we go, 2 years later with the help of my housemate. And so you see there's an example before and after. And that's so true with Jesus, that we have these before moments and then these after moments. And some of you may have watched The Chosen. If you haven't, I really recommend it. And it's basically a TV series about the life of Jesus. And there's a quote that I love from Mary Magdalene. And she says, "I was one way, and now I am completely different. And the thing that happened in between was him." And I think we see that in this story that we just heard read to us. There's this before and after moment where the in between was Jesus. And I think the whole of life is a before and after moment. It's not just one single moment, it's an ongoing process of becoming formed and changed to be more like Jesus. And Jesus is the in between. And as we go deeper into this passage, the more I began to go deeper in it, I realized it's actually quite a mystery. And the more I began to dig deep into this passage, the more I actually began to, I guess, raise more questions. But I wonder if we can embrace that mystery and actually begin to perhaps sit in this passage and perhaps begin to imagine it. Imagine the before and after in this scene. The before, as the disciples are locked up in fear on the Sabbath. So it was only a few days after Jesus had died. Their beloved master, their teacher, their friend that they looked up to, that they put all their hope in. Can you imagine the disappointment? How traumatized they would have felt after seeing their best friend die. How confused they would have been hearing reports now of Jesus being alive, but the pain and grief being so deep that they're cynical and don't dare get their hopes up again. And not only that, but they are afraid of the Jewish leaders and what they might do to them now their beloved master has been crucified. So quite naturally, they locked the doors. They shut everyone out. And maybe those doors that are shut and locked could be a metaphor for their own hearts. Maybe now they aren't going to take any chances. They put up their guards and their defenses. They're not going to let anyone in because of fear of being let down once again. They're not going to allow themselves to be fooled again by some area of hope, because the trauma of seeing their best friend being arrested and killed right in front of their very eyes is just a blow too much. I wonder, can you imagine yourself in that room? What would you be feeling? How would you be responding in this moment? And perhaps there's areas in your life that feel like those doors that have been shut and locked, where you put the guard up, areas where you don't dare believe or trust again, areas of deep disappointment and grief and pain. Maybe you can imagine those places. But then there's that moment, that great but moment when Jesus comes into the room. What would your response be? He comes in, he enters in, and he stands alongside them and among them. Can you imagine the wonder as Jesus himself, risen in all his glory from the dead, with still the nail marks on his hands and the wounds, as he walks into the room. Can you imagine your eyes fixed on him, captivated by him, gazing upon the wonder of the risen Lord Jesus? How do you be feeling? Can you imagine the surprise, the shock? Is this really real? And I wonder, what would we do if Jesus came into our midst right now? And the thing is, he's already here, standing among us in this room, closer than we often realize, turning up whether we expect him or not, because nothing can stand in the way. He breaks through the walls, he turns up. He comes right through our walls of fear and shame and meets us where we're at, because nothing in all creation is strong enough to separate us from his love. And then can we imagine hearing his greeting of peace be with you? Maybe that peace just seems crazy. Peace in the midst of the danger, the threat, the fear they're feeling from the Jewish leaders, the threat of potential capture. And at this point, it doesn't feel like anything has changed yet. Jesus is saying, peace be with you. And Jesus here is promising more than just peace. It was actually a typical Hebrew greeting that they'd say to one another, peace be with you. And the word comes from Hebrew of shalom. And as I began to dig deeper into what this word means, I was amazed, because shalom is a word that is used throughout the Old Testament. And it means more than just peace. Yes, peace, it does mean that, but it also means that sense of wholeness, that sense of harmony. It comes, so irene is the Greek word, and it comes from the verb iro, which means to tie or join together in a whole. So shalom, this peace that Jesus says, peace be with you, is like this sense of completeness, this sense of wholeness. It could even refer to perhaps a completed stone wall that has no cracks or gaps in it. It could refer to that well-being, that completeness, that wholeness, that restoration that only Jesus can bring, that restoration of broken relationships. So I wonder, can we see the weight of what Jesus is saying here as he says, shalom be with you. Words pregnant with hope and fulfilled longing. Because Jesus is promising here that he is the long-awaited shalom. That Jesus, now risen from the dead as the King of Kings, is that shalom, that peace, that sense of wholeness and restoration that they've been longing for. Because not only does he say shalom, but he is shalom in the flesh, the whole complete one, with nail scars in his hands and the nail marks. Here they see the wounds that bring healing and restoration. They see the price that he paid, the agony that he went through on the cross only a few days before. Those scars that tell of that love divine. And it's at that point that they realize that Jesus is Lord. And so often I think perhaps we feel like we have to see the power and might of Jesus to really see the Lord. But maybe it's actually his sufferings that will really change us. Maybe it's that point that we actually realize he is the Lord. When we see the sufferings, when we enter in, that's only then we enter into the sufferings we can see the joy of his resurrection. So I wonder, do we see the Lord? They had great joy as they saw the Lord. Do we notice him in the everyday? Not just on the mountaintop moments that are glorious, but also in the pain and suffering. Do we see him just like the disciples saw him, in his nail marks, with his suffering, with the wounds, with his scars? Do we see the Lord? And they overcome with joy, but it's a joy that they can't keep to themselves. And Jesus then commissions them out on this mission. And he says, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you. And we get caught up in Jesus' ongoing mission. Because once we've experienced Jesus' shalom, once we've experienced this restoration that restores our broken hearts and our broken hopes and our broken dreams, it's there that we begin to get called out to bring his shalom, his restoration, his peace to a hurting and broken world. And we get to join in with him in making all things new, bringing wholeness and life. Because it's been his mission all along. It's the God who sends. There's a beautiful term called Missio Dei, which I love in thinking about mission. And the idea is it's the God who sends and we join in with him. Because it's so much more fun getting caught up in what the Father is doing and joining in with him. But the amazing thing is, we don't go alone. So it's this beautiful moment where Jesus breathes and says, receive the Holy Spirit. So you may be wondering, why does Jesus breathe? What is all this about? And the Greek word emphaseo, I don't know if I said it, but don't worry, it doesn't really matter. But this word is only used once in the New Testament here. But it's also used in the Old Testament as God breathes life into Adam at the very start of humanity. He creates and breathes life into humanity. And then the same word is also used in a place called Ezekiel, where there's this valley of dry bones, and God calls him out among these dry bones and calls him to prophesy. And breath comes, and the dry bones come to life, and they stand up a vast army. His breath creates, but it also revives, and it breathes life, new life. And that's what we see in baptism, this new life that we enter into. And just like the breath of life that created heaven, it now creates a new humanity filled with the resurrection power and life of the risen Jesus. But as I was thinking about this, to really experience Jesus' breath, can we imagine being in that room as Jesus breathes? You have to be close. You have to be close enough for intimacy. Can you imagine being close enough to Jesus to feel his warmth of his breath, reviving you, restoring you, bringing life to those known places of your heart? And an illustration perhaps is in the last month. Crazy enough, I've been ill 3 times. And one of the reasons is because we live in community. And that's one of the joys of living in community, is that we're close enough to catch each other's bugs and diseases and whatever else. And I wondered if that perhaps could be an illustration of that closeness to Jesus. Are we close enough to catch his shalom as we breathe it in, so that we actually end up breathing it out wherever we go? Because it's this in our lungs, as we've just been singing, that gives us authority for us to breathe out and to share the message of Jesus and his hope of resurrection and shalom wherever we go. And at this moment, as we pause, maybe we feel discouraged hearing this story of this great before and after of the disciples who are locked up in fear, encountering the risen Jesus. Because maybe you feel like actually a bit of FOMO. That word might be a modern term, but it means fear of missing out. And I suffer with FOMO a lot, which is annoying. I wish it wasn't there. And maybe you're feeling FOMO in this moment because you're like, actually, you want to be overjoyed, but maybe deep down you're a little bit jealous or envious because you wish you had a story like that of seeing the Lord for yourself, and maybe there's a little bit of resentment or bitterness or jealousy or cynicism, like, why can't I experience the Lord like that? And if that's you, well, you might resonate with our friend Thomas, because Thomas comes in and he wasn't there the first time. I don't know why he wasn't there. It doesn't really tell us. And then when the disciples tell him, we've seen the Lord, and they're excited and tell him that, Thomas says, and yes, I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails are, and put my hand into his side. I will not believe. And in the Greek, it's even stronger. There's a double negative that's used, so it's almost like Thomas is saying, I really, 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 really will not believe. And I wonder if we can resonate with Thomas, with that wrestle. Maybe our own trauma has kept us in that place of cynicism. And then it's almost like deja vu a week later, because on the same day, again, the doors are locked and the disciples are gathered. And guess what? Once again, Jesus comes in and stands among them and says, peace be with you. Shalom be with you. Sound familiar? But this time, Thomas is present. And I love that, because Jesus comes back just for Thomas. And Jesus says to Thomas, put your finger here, Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe. Here I can see the kindness of Jesus, the kindness to Thomas. That even when Thomas wasn't in the room, and Jesus wasn't in the room when Thomas said that he wouldn't believe unless he sees the nail marks and touches his wounds, yet Jesus still knew the wrestle that Thomas had. He knew the questions, the doubt, because Jesus is bigger than his questions and his doubt and his wrestle. And he's bigger than ours too. And Thomas's response is incredible because he cries out, "My Lord and my God." Thomas, the faithless one, now confessing the sincerity of a faith that now believes in the lordship and the divinity of Jesus. A confession of great faith that we don't hear from other disciples. And I love that before and after moment. We don't even know if Thomas actually touched the wounds, interesting enough, or whether just seeing Jesus with his scars and his wounds was enough. Because Jesus' presence is enough. Just the sight of him, just being with him was enough. Thomas knew that he was fully seen and fully known. And that is impossible to miss out with Jesus, because he shows up uniquely to each one of us. He sees us and he knows our doubts and our questions. He knows the wrestles. So I wonder if, like Thomas, what if the greatest questions, the greatest wrestle, the greatest doubt can actually lead to the greatest revelation and the greatest faith? Because great faith isn't hiding our wrestle, our doubt, or questions, but actually bringing them into his presence. The question of faith is actually, who do we run to? As we bring our wounds and our sorrows to him, that's where we see afresh the greatness of the wounded one, this man of sorrows, who isn't afraid to suffer with us in the wrestle and to weep with us. It's in that place that we gaze upon his nail-scarred hands, and his wounded side, that we may not understand, we may never understand, but we begin to trust his goodness, his faithfulness, his love that never fails even unto death. And we're able to cry out in surrender, "My Lord and my God." So here we see an amazing before and after. The disciples locked up in fear, now rejoicing because they have seen the Lord, fearful but now fearless as they receive Jesus' peace, his shalom, his wholeness, and are sent out to carry that wherever they go. And then we see before and after of Thomas, filled with questions, doubts, wrestling with the trauma of it all, now crying out in surrender and complete trust, "My Lord and my God." Because everything changes when Jesus walks into the room. His presence changes us. And the amazing thing is that he's just as much present here today. I love how John ends his Gospels. He says, Jesus did many other things as well. And if every one of them were written down, there wouldn't be space even in the whole world for the books written. Because he's still, the risen Lord Jesus is still showing up today, changing broken lives, broken hearts. Even to us, who perhaps feel more like Thomas, who with our doubts and our questions and our FOMO. So I guess the question is, will we come close? Will we allow him in, even through our hearts that are locked up with fear and shame? Will we allow him close enough, that intimacy of experiencing his breath of life that restores and brings shalom to those deepest places? Will we, like Thomas, come with all our questions, our doubts, our fears, our wrestle, and take another look at his wounds that we see on the cross, his nail scars? Because even today, he's just as willing to come and find us, as he was to those first disciples, to meet us where we're at. And there's still a blessing for those of us who haven't seen physically, but see with the eyes of faith, and still believe and trust him to be enough. And the invitation today is to know Jesus more by sharing in his sufferings and his resurrection, sharing in that joy of seeing him. And that's the great invitation of day by day being formed and changed by him. It's an ongoing process. This before and after, it's not just a single moment, but it's an ongoing process of day by day being continually transformed and changed by the presence of Jesus in our midst. Amen.